Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Anderson, and I am the, uh, what am I? I'm the programming's coordinator at Big Medium. Today for our coffee chat, we have Johanna Tesfaye and also Kendall Gross. Johanna Tesfaye hails from Dallas, Texas, and is currently the public programs manager at the San Antonio Museum of Art. She worked for several museum institutions prior to San Antonio Museum of Art, including the Mexic-Art Museum and the Dallas Museum of Art, where she was the McDermott Fellow for Community and Gallery Teaching. She holds a BA and MA in Art History from Emory University and the University of Texas at Austin, respectively. In her free time, she enjoys reading both historical and science fiction and loves thinking about alternate realities and liberations. Kendall Gross serves as the Art Galleries at Black Studies Curator of Public Programs. She holds a BA from Emory University and an MA in Art History from the University of Texas at Austin, where she specialized in the art of Mesoamerica and modern appropriations of ancient art forms. She has worked with the Blount Museum of Art as a graduate teaching fellow and with UT's Mesoamerica Center as a curatorial research assistant. Her public education experience includes researching and preparing lectures for a range of audiences from K to 12 to university groups to museum volunteers. I want to welcome you both. Thank you so much for coming along and having a coffee chat with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting us, Andrew, and also shout out to Justin, who's behind the scenes. We're so excited to be here, and I'm very excited to have Johanna, one of my truest homies for we've been friends since undergrad at Emory University, and we've been talking about this subject for quite a long time. So it will be fun to be here discussing it with y'all.
Hey.
Well,
yeah, so
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna bow out and just and listen in, and I'll encourage our attendees to submit your questions and comments in the chat. And 10 minutes before the end of this conversation, we'll try to get to those comments. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, Johanna. Once again, thank you for being here. I think more than anyone else, I probably actually talked to you about museums the most. I feel like we're having all these weekly conversations, like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? I want to bring up one of my favorite sort of moments that we kind of kikied about, dancing in the name of justice for speaking truth to power and all that kind of stuff. But
still, okay, sorry, go, keep going.
We can do this all day, so I want to try and be good and respect people's time. But yeah, when we kind of started talking about what do we want to have this coffee chat be about, what do we really want to focus on, of course, museums, that was at the forefront. And so I think we can just really kick this off by thinking about how in the past few years, museums have really been under fire, in many ways, rightfully so. And this isn't necessarily new. I think that in 2020, we certainly saw it escalate, right? I think there was this conference that I didn't get to attend, but I think you did, Death to Museums. And I remember getting that email and thinking, oh, we're there now, right? We're there.
Yes.
And then in another instance, I think there was another article that I was looking at that said, are we past museums, right? Is the age of the museum over? And so perhaps we can kick off the conversation just by talking about this reckoning with museums that's happening right now, but how we've seen it also in the
past. Yes, death to museums. Museums are over. No.
Shirt that says that.
Yeah, when that Death to Museums conference kind of came out, I remember I knew people who were flustered by that. They were just kind of like, I just can't believe they're saying this. And then it gets tossed into this oh, these young folks are just, asking for too much. And I'm just, I think, yeah, maybe it's too much for y'all. I don't know. But we're just asking for y'all to do better, be better, And Also like I've primarily worked in encyclopedic museums, and I think those are a little bit more complicated, a little bit more, they got some history to them and some baggage, if you will. And death to those. I don't all through all my readings, I'm just thinking like, I just come back down to the conclusion that encyclopedic museums really should not exist. Like it just, there's no way of going around those issues, right? And in the last couple of years, like decolonial, like right, decolonization. And I remember that was like my buzzword for a couple of years. I was like all about this. I was talking about my homie, who's not my homie, but the the scholar Walter McNillo. In my head, he's my homie. But I was all about that, and now I'm like so over that word. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to think about it. It's the same as like diversity, because now I just think decolonial can mean so many different things in different contexts. And in American museums, first things first, land back, just straight up, that. And those are things that sound really wild to museums. And I think a lot of the things that we've been asking for museums this past couple of years, especially in the last year, people are just like, oh, well, it's going to take time, and we can't just do things overnight. And it's just like, yeah, okay, fine. I'll succumb. You don't have, this stuff will take a long time. But you could just post your salary to your job posting. That's not overtime. That's just overnight. I can update it for you. So it's like there are big picture things that will take time, but there are so many smaller things that we could just take care of in the meantime. Yeah, they're just like, oh, I can't do that work.
I can't imagine.
Being honest. What?
Because right, you can break down what you want in terms of short-term goals, long-term goals, right? Like, sure, it may take a while to repatriate objects, right? Like that's going to be a very complicated topic of conversation. But in some ways it is also wild to me, especially because in the past few weeks, there's been a boom of articles talking about, should we give Black communities their the bones of their ancestors back? I'm like, well, yeah, right. I don't understand how that's still a topic of debate. And I find myself thinking about that a lot when museums like, oh, is this up for debate? Like, are we not thinking about ethics in terms of, yeah, maybe we should bury the bones of these Black people who have been in museum holdings forever. But I also understand what you're saying about how sometimes these words that mean a lot, right? Like decolonial is it packs a lot in one word.
It sure does. It's a large word, and I love looking at words, but
yeah, it needs to be broken down. And also just want to shout you out really quickly also, because I think half of my resources that I really reference come from you. Like I know Walter McNolo because of you. And that is also now, once again, he does not know it, but like he's my homie as well. I'm always referencing Walter McNolo in my work. And even his work, when I read the work of Walter McNolo and other people who are really thinking about decolonial practice, they're thinking about, equity, they're thinking about what does abolition mean in this day and age? It's work. Right? It's work, but it's also work that takes time. And I don't fear time. What I fear is the waste of time. And I think that is something that sometimes museums have a problem with, right? How many committees can we have dedicated to diversity and inclusion and equity, right? Sure, you want to plan, but like, let's get the plan going. And so it's been an interesting time really contending with museums at this point. Honestly, I think I'm with you about encyclopedic museums, and more so on the side of someone who has done education in museums. To get docents to learn artwork from, contemporary Black art, to then learning about the art of the ancient Andes, to then 16th century European painting, it's a lot.
We ask so much of these folks, and they still don't get paid. And and then they still be hella problematic. And it's just like, yeah, because what scholar is supposed to know everything about every time period and how to make this relevant? We just ask so much of docents, and we train them and whatever, and we still can't get them to stop saying Oriental. Or I remember at one of my museum experiences, the docents just, oh, you're a Black kid, let's take you to the African galleries.
Yes.
I don't think that's how that works, Susan, and it's just like really frustrating because I do see them trying, but it's just, think about the damage and violence that you can cause in the meantime, in between time. And it's just really sad, I think, to ask all of those folks to do that. And I don't know.
No, I love you, because that's exactly what I want to hit on next. I'm like, wow, look at this energy. The sort of docent system, right? So like museums themselves have been taken to task. I've also seen within that sort of header, right, docents, this idea of like the docent program also being taken to task. Yeah, a lot of docent programs aren't paid, but a lot of Black and brown people, a lot of people who are from lower income backgrounds, they need money. And I don't know how you feel about this, but sometimes when undergrads approach me about how did I get here, and what do you think about internships? I'm like, kids, sometimes this stuff is underpaid, right? Or sometimes it's unpaid. And I feel very conflicted about giving them advice sometimes about like unpaid internships. Like, yeah, do this docent program that will get you a foot in the door when it comes to education, but they can't afford to take an unpaid docent position, right? And so then when you get docents, they're usually upper class, wealthy, they've got the time, right? Like, who has time?
They got to retire. Yeah, privilege.
Exactly. And they're usually white. You don't see a lot of diversity in docents. And so, yeah, it's just across the board problematic, because then you want to hire people who are unpaid, but then when it's actually time to teach the artwork, sometimes the pedagogy is really restrictive. Because yeah, you are trying to ask a lot of someone, and these people can only really do as much as they can, right? You can't ask everybody to do everything. You can't ask them to have knowledge of all this stuff. But then also thinking about, are you ready to teach about Black art to students? Can you look at this work in a lens other than, well, let's think about racial injustice as we look at this work? How can you tease out more about it versus just, let's talk about race?
Yeah, and then you see a lot of things that in my current museum, other museums I've been in, then they kind of want to have this social justice tour, or they want to have like some kind of like branch off of what they already offer. And I think that's the problem for me when it comes to like DIA work. That's what we call it, DIA, because we have the little accessibility. But then I was just thinking, like, you could put diversity, inclusion, equity, and I'd be like, die.
You already hear first, folks.
What was I saying though? So that's the problem with all of this, is that like it's just like an offshoot for diversity work. And I always try to tell people it's a through line. And if you cannot grasp that, then like we aren't going to get anywhere. Like the more that you have these offshoot series of diversity this, diversity that, then the more annoying it's going to be. I mean, in my opinion, I'm going to be more annoyed. Going back to like docents and like these unpaid internships and unpaid positions, I just thought about how like that is so colonial, right? Like you're exploiting this labor so that you can continue to run and make the millions that you do.
Yeah.
I was just, since I've been on the internship circuit, it's whack, you know what I'm saying? Or like, and a lot of museums too think that it's okay, like, well, they'll get college credit. And I'm like, okay, great. So now they get to pay to be here, to do tasks that we just don't have money to create a position for that, right? Like you do this little offshoot work, and it just makes me really sad. And I'm really glad that you think about what you say to these young folks about when it comes to like, what does it look like to be a museum professional. And and Olivia, our homie, We always try to tell it like it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, it isn't glamorous. It seems very sexy on the outside, but like, no, this is grunt work. This is constant fighting and battling. And then, yeah, you're not going to get paid, on top of that. And that's how certain people keep getting their foot in their door because, well, who cares about money? And, it's just, but at the flip side, I hate diversity pipelines.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Because I was thinking to myself, like, when I was doing the internship at the DMA, I was just like, am I always just going to be a diversity fellow, a diversity intern for the next, couple of years until I get a real job? Yeah. And I hate that. I hate that for me, for other people of color. And I hate that, like, that's what we're going to be seen as. And since we're not a through line, then we can be discarded very easily because it was not built into the system as is. It was just an offshoot.
Yeah. They'll call you back when they need, something for Black History Month, right?
Oof.
I think about that a lot as well because, so someone will come to me, Kendall, I really love art and art history. I want to think about social identity and politics and museums. Shout out to Leo, her dog in the background right now. And they're bright-eyed, they're bushy-tailed. What do I do? And so sometimes, I don't want to encourage them to do this unpaid thing. But then when I think about the resources that I can give them, well, hey, there's this diversity internship. You will probably be one Black people at this museum. Because you will be that Black person at the museum, you will be a representative for every Black person, apparently, right? When it comes to these sort of initiatives. And that itself is taxing, right? So you don't get paid, it's taxing. You're expected to do a lot of this DIA work in a museum as a Black person, as a person of color. And it's an uphill battle. Usually having to fight people. And one thing that we often talk about is this the hill that I want to die on? Right?
Yeah. A lot of those hills for me.
It's true. There have been so many times, thinking about our own professional development, where I have to stop and think to myself, Kendall, is it worth it? Is it worth it to call this out? Is it worth it to point this out? If you think you point this out, are you able to handle the sort of repercussions of you saying this to this person? And sometimes the answer is honestly no, right? Like I've got to protect myself. I've got to consider how I move in spaces, and it's not always the best thing, but the art world can be very unkind sometimes. And I think even in the past few weeks, oh my gosh, we've all seen what happened to like Nicole Hannah-Jones, for example, with the 1619 Project. This is a woman who has done the work. Is a celebrity in her own
like Arthur Genius Award recipient. Like, are you kidding me right now? And you're going to deny this person tenure? I mean, wild.
Wild.
And I think I was thinking about this earlier. I think there is a very strong correlation between museums and academia, higher education, because I think the way that they operate, obviously, capitalistic triangle, this and that, hierarchy. But I think even like, so, I learned about this quickly at my internship at the DMA. It's that like, I'll be in this position, manager of whatever. And that's it. If I cannot grow any more than that manager of like K through 12 school programs, unless I just want to like pivot and do something like manager of teen programs. There is no growing in anything. And then if I want to become a director of education, I'm waiting for this person to like retire or something happens to them.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, then you just apply at a museum in a different place. And I just think like in academia, they expect you to travel all over America, all over the world to get these like little years here, 6 months here, do this for us. And where's the stability in any of that? And how do I grow as a professional if folks don't want to be a director of education, but they still have really brilliant ideas? Like, are they just going to be manager of X programs for the rest of their lives?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know. Let's quickly say a prayer for like all the people in the art world really quickly, because it's so true across the board, right? I don't think I've ever met someone in the arts who wasn't tired. Whether you're in museum education, whether you're a preparator, whether you're an art student, being surrounded by art history MAs, PhDs, I'm like, God bless, because it's hard. And I constantly talk to some of my friends about that, right? You know, I'm trying to build a life here, but I need opportunity. And even though I've built a life in Texas, if a job calls for me in, you know, North Carolina, I kind of have to uproot myself to go to North Carolina for this opportunity. And honestly, I still felt like that as an undergrad and as a grad student. If this paid position is here for me in Kansas, you know, are we about to go to Kansas?
Girl, I interviewed for the Birmingham Museum of Art in Alabama. And you know, and they're like, we want you to stay here for at least 5 years. I ain't never been to Birmingham. I don't know what it's like. I don't know the vibe. And I'm supposed to just commit 5 years of my life to the city. But I also think that, you know, I'm the public programs person for SAMA in San Antonio. And every day I kind of think about how like this, you know, I'm gonna oust myself here. This position really needs to be from someone who's from San Antonio. You know, there's that community that you need with your space, but because as a professional, you're just hopping around and doing all this kind of stuff, it's hard to build that community and hard to build those links and hard to like to do all of that, especially as a young professional. And so, you know, I sometimes do feel really guilty for not being from San Antonio, but like a lot of things that I do, I'm like, I could do this in a heartbeat in Dallas. Like I know who to call on. I know who I can like pull strings from, and
Yeah,
it makes life harder. And I think that, I mean, that goes back to the pipelines and stuff like that, but
yeah. This is very true. I hadn't thought about that before, how sometimes, so yeah, in addition to not getting paid, being underpaid, I'm always feeling like you have a community in some of these spaces, right? Like if you're doing this sort of DEO work, are you supported?
yeah.
It's in my internship, it's in the description, but when push comes to shove, are you going to support me in doing it? But you're also uprooted from place. And when you're uprooted from place, then sometimes you do lose that community, you lose those networks, you lose those connections along the way, and you have to build it up again and again and again as you continue to move for fellowships, internships, what have you. I also want to shout out in the chat, I don't know who put it, maybe Justin, Andrew, Change the Museum.
Yikes.
Which, you know, I've had to kind of step back from Change the Museum a bit because this is so overwhelming because yeah, it's across the board.
So I live for that type of stuff. I live for rage. I live for kind of like, well, F that museum. And it's like, yeah. But it's actually, no, it's incredibly sad and disappointing. But I slowly enjoy it. Like I'd love to see the Getty burn a little bit. And, you know, they have like 1 million job openings open. And it's like, well, good luck to you.
It's true.
And I do feel, and I sympathize with like the people who want to commit change in those kind of institutions, that it's hard out there. And, you know, it's easier to, okay, this is a whole different kind of diverging, but like, so a lot of these museums that are on Change the Museum, I think are the big ones, at least the ones that are being called out with like a tag.
Yeah.
It's the Getty, it's all the museums in New York,
Yeah.
New York City, because none of them can get anything right. And I just think that like the smaller museums, it is harder to call out and to tag your museum because there's only 5 of y'all working there.
Yeah. I had to think about that, but I'm like, yeah, it's like, it was you.
And I think, but that's the wild part to me though, because some of these smaller museums, you're small, you know, if you can go talk to your director because they're just like right there, that's opportunity in my eyes, right? Like you're smaller, so you can change, right? It's going to be hard to change MoMA, or, you know, that takes so much more power, I think, than just these smaller institutions that could potentially do these things.
Yeah. At some point in my career, I don't know, starting off, of course, the Met, right? If I ever got a job at the Met, that would be my dream. If I ever got a job in New York City, that would be my dream. And I think that currently working at a smaller institution, working for a gallery, has definitely shifted my perspective of, you want small, you want intimate. And even my past job, it was a small art gallery, and I thrived there. It was, I could talk to the director, I could talk to different artists. I was allowed more access in a way, versus sometimes when I've worked in bigger museums, I was just a cog, right? And that's perhaps rude to say, but I felt small. I felt my position and I felt small.
I hate big museums, and I hate how they get all the shine. And coming from, I'm from Texas, whatever, man, but do not talk to me about LA or New York City. And I'm so tired of those places. Always getting the shine, or like I've been every museum I've been in, which is all in Texas, except for one at Emory. But they're always like, well, what's the Met doing? Or, what maybe the Whitney's doing this, we could do that. And let's get a mirror and show who we are, because we're not those places. We don't got that money. We don't got the attention. Like New York City is very artsy, but not every town in the South is.
No.
So it's a whole nother set of challenges. And if I hear that one more time about how, well, like the Getty does this or LACMA, and I'm just like, I don't care.
Do it again.
I don't.
I'm gonna take that from you next time. What is not sort of inspiring, but what is inspiring, I'm seeing a lot of museums in the South say, no. We're gonna think about the South now. Like, it's time to think about place. It's time to think about geography. Let's give shine and recognition to artists who are coming out of the South. And there's so much talent. And I talk about this a lot with even my hometown in New Orleans, right? New Orleans is huge in terms of the arts. So much coming out of the city, so much talent. But as I've lived in Austin, I've quickly realized that there are a lot of artists who are getting shine here or working here that are not getting it back home in New Orleans. Like, what's up with that? Like, what is up with the visual arts in this very iconic Black art city that I can't even really tell you too many like culturally specific places in New Orleans that are like getting the shine that they should be, but also artists who are actively creating in that space usually leave. And that's something that I've been reckoning with lately. Is that something that you want to address? Is that where you want your career to go in the future? How about you go back home and try and build these culturally specific art spaces for people in New Orleans? But yeah, I think that DEI work has become a brand, and that scares me.
Oh, you don't want to electric slide into the liberation movement?
I can drop it in front of white supremacy, right?
That's not you? Oh, I didn't know. Oh, I thought just start dancing and, oh, we're gonna be free.
So what we're specifically talking about, to give the people context. So Patrisse Cullors, who, Nobel Prize nominee, New York Times bestselling author, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, just recently had an event with
the Hammer Museum in LA.
In LA, where the event was called, F white supremacy, we're gonna get free, basically. And it was supposed to encourage participants to submit videos of themselves doing the electric slide, right? And this idea of like, we're gonna bring Black joy out. And so we're going to do the electric slide to confront white supremacy and to revel in Black joy.
Sponsored by UGG.
Sponsored by UGGs. And I lost it. The internet lost it. And that's the thing, right? Sometimes I feel on the outs where I feel like the radical sort of person who's just always disagreeing with someone, like, oh, I don't know if this is actually a win for the people. But they ate the Hammer Museum up for that, as they should have, because what is this doing, right? What is this doing? What is this achieving? And it kills me every time that a brand wants to come on to some sort of DI project. Why didn't you give that money to a mutual aid fund? Why didn't you give it to like a K-12 program that provides food? Why? If you want to give your money to the electric slide.
It's bizarre because, you know, currently right now, like in the education department at Salmon, like grant funded up to the wazoo, like we rely on grants. There is no endowments to help us do educational programming. And so like we're constantly on that like wheel or cycle of grants, and it's tiring. It's a little bit too much. It stifles what we can really do because or we always have to do like these fresh new things. And I'm critiquing this idea of newness all the time, but it holds us back. And so it would be so helpful if UGG was just like, yeah, here's $1 million, or, you know, whatever, not million, but
no, we want the million. We want the million.
Give me the million to whatever, you know, like that is way more pivotal and helpful than you sponsoring us to do the electric slide. And I was telling you this, like, I was just like, I don't want to joy with an institution. Like, that's not, the institution has given me PTSD. I am not trying to sit there and dance with them and be like, yeah, liberation.
Well, especially when I don't know you, right? You're a corporation, you're an institution. Who are you? I don't know your politics. I don't know what you stand for. And so I can't look at UGGs or Nike and think, yeah, you know, you're doing the work, right? And I don't know.
It's becoming commodified, kind of like pride.
Kind of like thinking about decolonialism, perhaps? Another buzzword?
Right. And I swear they might even like come out with like a decolonial, but in like the rainbow, so they can do double duty for Pride Month. Like it's just like jokes like that. And it makes diversity work. It's just a joke. And it's hard for me to take some of these things seriously. And it's hard for me to, it just makes me really sad, kind of, because I did that thing that you're not supposed to do when you're not supposed to fall in love with your partner's potential, but just put in a museum. And I felt like I did that. I fell in love with the museum's potential, and I have not seen anything that has warmed my heart in a long time, because it's such full of BS, or people are just so afraid. And I just need these white folks to kind of give me something here. And like, that is going to take sacrifice. And guess what? Y'all need to sacrifice.
Yeah. You know, yeah, a relationship, right? Two-way street. I think about that a lot because I am at this point, I think all of my friends, honestly, all my colleagues, all the professionals I've encountered, it feels like every meeting we kind of started off with a sigh, like the every Negro sigh or something like that. We all love the art. We love the arts, right? We don't love the art world, but we love visual arts. We love performing arts. We believe in its potential. That's the reason why we're here, right? Like that's the reason why we put ourselves through PhD programs. That's why we put ourselves through MFAs. That's why we read as much as we do. That's why we keep up with art news. That's why we teach. I am so inspired whenever I give, you know, a tour to kids, and they are the ones kind of leading it. They're the ones who are calling things out. I'm just a mediator. I'm in the background. I'm guiding the conversation, but they are the ones who are pointing out these really detailed layers and points in artwork. Same thing with programs where I feel like someone actually gets something out of it. All it takes is one person to make a very hectic program turn around for you. Like, yes, all right, I think somebody actually got something out of this. But it's tiring. And I don't know. I love the fact that you said that, because you fall in love with the potential. And to say that, once again, we always talk about DEI being a brand. And I talked to you earlier about just yesterday, I got an email about implicit biases training for your corporation, DEI work 101. I don't believe in DEI work like that. But I do start to believe it when I see it done through the arts. I start to believe it when I see, like kids speaking truth to power through the work of Charles White or something like that. I see it when, the Brooklyn Museum has decided to suspend operations to do sort of like a food drive, right? And so I am also very inspired by you, because one thing that I love about what you do is that you're always reading fantasy. And I think that is so important, always forward looking. And I will admit to sometimes looking down Like, I don't think I'm as forward looking as I should be. I'm always kind of thinking about, Kendall, where are you about to land? Right? Because like time. Time. Really. There's this quote by Toni Morrison where she says, you know, one of the worst things about racism is that it robs you of your time. It distracts you. And when you're always having to prove, you know, I am worthy of being in this space, you know, here's my inherent value as a Black person. You're being robbed of your time to do other things. You're being robbed of your time for joy. You're being robbed of your time to do the programming that you want, to raise the funds that you want, to do the mutual aid projects that you want. Because, oh, well, I guess it's time for me to hop back into like DEI 101 and like teach that class.
I don't want to talk about biases ever again in my entire life. Like, read a book.
Read a book. People have done the work.
It's time to get to some action. You know what I'm saying? Let's not pretend like this just started, you know, last year in July. Let's, like, you know, people have been calling for these things for so long and you still haven't made progress. It's because you didn't take it seriously. But now that you are, it's like, okay, we got to catch up. We got to hire our DEA consultants. We got to do our like little equity plan. And it's just like, we all know, like, you're fake. It's fake. It's performative. And
yeah,
sorry.
No, it feels like it slows things down, if anything, right?
Well, Kendall, I'm curious because you wrote something and it was all about that slow movement. And and I get it. It should be slow and caring and thoughtful. And I think museums missed it. We had this year in the pandemic and, you know, I'm very grateful and thankful. And I had to work through a lot of guilt for, you know, honestly not being fired or not being like laid off like so many others were. But yeah, I kept my job, and this whole time, like, there was just no space to reimagine. And I'm like, this is the perfect time to just like, let's take a step back, review what we're doing, and like, think about where we want to go. And I try to reiterate that so many different times at my museum. And it was just like, could not comprehend. And I think it's because, like you were saying, like, there's a lack of imagination. It's wild to me. It's like, I mean, I grew up low-key. I'm not an only child, but I grew up as an only child because there's 7 years difference. So I was always by myself, essentially reading books or literally talking to like fake people, pretending I'm doing something, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think through all of that, I think that's what helps me, like, just imagine something new or different. Like, what if, like, remember I was telling you, what if there was a different AAM, you know? What would that look like? And how could we accomplish that? Because once you have an idea, then you just start figuring out the basic steps. And I think Toni Cade Bambara, I think she wrote something, she like said something like, as writers or poets, you're supposed to make the revolution irresistible.
Yes.
And I think about that quote all the time because, yeah, does not your freedom, does not like another way of doing things where you're not tired or where you're having meaningful interactions with your community, is that not an irresistible idea enough?
Yeah.
And it really breaks my heart because
say it.
Some folks, some white folks, they don't got the range. And that's all I gotta say. They don't have the range. And that's what's holding us back. And I'm like, I can't sit with you. I don't want to sit with you at your table.
Yeah. There's not always a sort of, okay, so we talk about a museum's mission, we talk about a gallery's mission, but I don't think everyone is always on board for the mission. And as much as we talk about museums being universal spaces, I really do think that some people pride themselves in working in actually very exclusive spaces, right? You know, I work for this museum. I have this knowledge, I have this authority, and I will be the one to dictate to you, right? Instead of that sort of back and forth collective learning. And it's, yeah, not everyone's on board, and that's the problem. Same thing with, you know, so you want to do DEI work, but I don't see people in marketing necessarily getting on it. I don't see the curator of, you know, Roman art, right? Because we need every single person to be on board. It's not just oh, well, we got the Black curators and they're in it. Yes.
Can we hop on curators for a second?
Johanna, speak your truth. What you gotta say?
Curators.
So funny.
So a lot of my friends are friends, they are curators, or they do things of that in that world, and I know a lot of people who I respect as a curator and their vision, but they piss me off. You have all the power in this museum. Everyone kisses your feet. You walk on water. And yet you can't get behind what we're saying. And like you were saying about everyone can be doing the through line of this diversity work, right? Not just the contemporary person.
Yeah.
It all baby, you think colonialism just happened in the contemporary times? No.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about art history. They enforce that, right? And I'm gonna bring up my moment in my grad school experience. First semester in my methods class, my favorite girl, well, should I say her name? Sally. I'm going there.
It's a conversation now, apparently.
This white woman told me, the only Black person in the cohort, in my master's cohort, why do, in the methods class, why do I have to learn about all of these kind of quote unquote, Black theory, Black thinkers, or why do I have to do that? I study ancient Roman stuff. And I was just like, you just thought to tell me, the only Black girl here, to why you gotta learn about women and non-white things. And it's just that's the problem. You think that this doesn't connect.
Yeah.
And it all connects. And I think it's because art history is on such a linear time frame, and I'm getting more into thinking about what time means in art history and how that applies to museums and those structures. Get out of it. It's not like we're A to Z. We're constantly, do we not know the phrase history repeats itself? Is that just a joke to y'all? And I'm also reading this book, about it's called Unlearning Imperialism. Shout out to Olivia, because she recommended it. And I'm 20, 30 pages in, and it's kind of one of those Fred Moten texts where it's just you take a page in and you ruminate.
Go away for a little bit. You gotta
I mean, all the great people like Walter McNillo, or there's just so many.
Yeah.
And she's over here saying the way to unlearn imperialism and to think about potential history is to start connecting different moments in time as being the same thing.
Yeah. I think we should just call this time, right? What we're talking about really is time. Because a lot of people do enforce this idea of evolutionary time, right? So if this moment happened here, I don't necessarily need to think about it and how the politics of this time affects how we even conceive of the ancient world, right? There's never any authentic return to the past. When we look at the past, when we look at history, we're always looking at it through a contemporary lens. So this evolutionary time that you're talking about doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And that's honestly kind of one reason why, I did leave the field of Mesoamerica. I still love the work that I did, and in some ways kind of continue to do, but not as much. But I could tell that no one wanted to really address the politics of identity in the ancient world. And I think, in fact, there are some people out there who go into ancient fields to avoid conversations about the politics of identity. And that worries me, because we're not separate from those conversations, so this concept of race is not, how to say this? But there's identification of Black, right? Yeah, that is a fairly new concept in many ways. But the idea of how we work around Blackness, the ideas of Blackness itself, those aren't new. I will never forget, I think actually at your museum, seeing these, oh my God, were they Roman ceramics? And they were of people who were supposed to be Nubian or something like that. You can already see those markers of, this person is phenotypically, physically different from me, and this is how I'm going to show it. This is what this other looks like. And that is something that you can see back back. I think there's even this Roman bathhouse where before you entered in the bathhouse, like there was a mosaic on the ground that you were meant to kind of like laugh at. And one was of a Black man, like perhaps, yeah, someone from Eastern Africa, I guess, maybe like the North. You were
Ethiopia.
supposed to laugh at him as you went into the bathhouse. And so once again, like we're not dealing with anything new necessarily, but
You know, one class I took in grad school, because she's this brilliant scholar, Geraldine Hang. Oh God, I hope that's her name, her last name. But anyways, she talked about medieval race,
Yeah.
and how race back then wasn't necessarily like Black and Asian, you know, all these terms or whatever, but it was more of just like a fundamental difference
yeah,
between me and this other person. So if you had red hair, you are racially different. And she proved this, you know, she's an English person, so you know how I feel too, how they interpret or do not interpret images. But
Yeah.
she was using those texts, English text, to kind of show how this conversation comes up medieval times. So
Yeah.
again, it just shows to me like you cannot divorce, like you're saying, like any of this from what we're doing right now, right? The
Yeah.
reason why colonialism is so strong and the aftermaths are so strong is because it's been a buildup. You know, we're constantly building towards these things, and
Yeah. And constantly denying them too. I think that, yeah, to bring it back to museums, I don't know if museums are always willing to confront that sort of colonial past.
so you know my origins in the Netherlands. I'm not from the Netherlands. There's no origin story there. But
Dutch golden age woman.
the Rijksmuseum, I love following them. That is a museum that I think is interesting. They did maybe a couple years ago, 2 years ago, they were doing something about their colonialism project in South Africa. And it was like South Africa and the Netherlands, and like what all of that means, because it was like a anniversary centennial of colonialism there. And I feel like they're constantly trying to think about things, because that was also the museum where they went back onto every label and was changing like the way that they refer to folks of color in their labels. And I thought that was like interesting, because also the Netherlands is just interesting, right? They don't think they're racial, they don't think they're racist, you know, all this other BS. But you know, I think the Rijksmuseum is really trying to take it there, and I really appreciate that from them. And the Rijksmuseum, so good.
I love your love of like Dutch art. We are coming up on time. I'm always trying to be cognizant of time. I think we want to leave like 10 minutes for questions, but I know that another thing that we kind of want to talk about, and I guess we quickly do it in 2 minutes. So a DI effort apparently now is to also start collecting more and more Black art.
Right.
And I'm happy to
save us. Because representation is going to save us.
Right. So this idea of representation, visual representation, can be DI work. And while I am happy to see more Black artists get shine, I do worry about, you know, representation is not the end, right? And Johan and I have constantly talked about this article by the scholar Darby English, who studies, you know, Black art and art history, and how he was talking about that's kind of a narrowing, actually, instead of a boom of what we can imagine as Black art. That now we're not seeing as much creativity in Black art as we used to in the past. And wondering, is that because a lot of these museums actually want to see a specific type of Blackness in their art museum? Or they want to see a work like, oh, this directly relates to the civil rights movement, so we're going to put this in our collection. This explicitly deals with, you know, poverty, so we're going to put this into our collection. But then perhaps looking at someone who deals in abstract art and thinking, well, we can't point to a figure here, we can't point to space here, so we're just not going to collect, you know, these Black abstract artists. And I think,
okay,
we got 1 minute.
Okay, two things.
Yes.
One, it's like every museum has to have their Kahinde to say that they're woke. Two, I think on the flip side, when I was at the DMA, they had a room full of Black abstract artists. Sam Gilliam, homeboy from Chicago. We just had that conversation about
Oh,
him.
Kevin Beasley.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a room full of Black abstraction art. And let me tell you, I just went around because I was just like, this does not speak to me. And it's just like, it's like that weird thing where it's just like, our folks is supposed like, I don't know, abstract art is really hard to get into, but I do agree that these kind of like portrait modes of stuff, like they don't have the range. And so they think if I get this Kahinde, if I get this, whoever, like it's
Artists.
yeah. And then, low key, go to your museums and check when they got that piece of art, right? Check that accession number. Was it 2015? Was it after the rise of this Black artist? Because I feel like also that's a safe choice for curatorial to make. Like once this Black artist has made it, then we can buy it and like, it's fine. Like no one can come for me. But like, it's more interesting and helpful if you can latch onto a Black artist before they make it big. Like how many people have a Carrot Walker in their collection and it's just a little small cutout and be like, we're woke, or I don't know.
No, it's true. I love your candy, Wiley Flander, always.
This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I absolutely loved y'all's perspective from behind the curtains of like museums. I think a lot of people, they go into museums, clean walls, everything's well put together, but man, the the things that go on in the background, it's very challenging stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to get to a couple of questions and comments. Tree Ozel, I think. Trizal. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She wanted to make a comment saying that thank you all for speaking so candidly about your experiences. I wonder what kind of spaces you all might imagine we can create outside of the museum or academia that takes what we hope to find in those places and utilizes them elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting question.
Yeah.
What up, Trizal? So for me, so when I fell in love with the potential of museums, I've always wanted them to be community spaces. I think that's what's interesting to me about those things. And so I come back to like community centers and thinking about, well, what does it look like? Have some art in the background, have maybe like these deep intellectual conversation, like spaces for that, spaces to do craft work, to learn how to, I don't know, knit or something, quilt, or, these long-standing traditions in a lot of different communities, and how to make sure that we can keep those traditions alive. And then thinking about foraging. There's this Black girl on TikTok who's always foraging. And I'm just like, how? Like, where do you find this knowledge? And like, you just forage out in the city, it's just like, but things like that, like getting people back to this community, like building this community, and art, it can be there with it, and I don't think we have to divorce it. And that's what I want museums to be more of, I don't necessarily want lectures. I don't want, I want a scholar to come and sit next to me in a circle and really kind of like break down some things for us, or like, Fred Moten, please help me out on like, page 33. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. And yeah, I just want to more like, I want to learn from people. I want to talk to old folks. I want to hear about their experiences, and I want to make sure that their experiences will be remembered, throughout.
Yeah, I think that thinking, I guess center is perhaps like the best word to use. And what I hear you saying and what I've been thinking about are more flexible spaces. Sometimes museums and galleries can be very static spaces, right? We don't do this here. This is how we do things. No, you can't do it. Museums tend to be places of no.
Oh, sorry. Maybe that's too much. First instinct to say no.
First instance is to say no. And yeah, maybe don't, like please don't throw down the Charles White, right? Like we need that, we want it for posterity, but also when sometimes people ask to collaborate with museum space, it's like, well, we can't accommodate that, right? And sometimes I think you probably could actually, but because it's a space of no, you won't. And so I do think about more flexible centers and what that could look like. Things come up, things come down. People come in, people come out. People do residencies there. They're able to exhibit, but then you also have a space where there's a community book project where you can like take books off the shelves. You can also help to, yeah, give out food. I think about sometimes the work that churches do sometimes even where
Yeah.
I know that my church back in New Orleans often does food drives. And every other Sunday, they will meet there to just give out food. Like, you don't need to do anything. Just like come get a fresh plate of food. And, you know, whoever doing the mac and cheese is throwing it down. And so, yeah, I want a more flexible space. And I often think about how people often call museums like dead spaces, right? That's a thing that's often said. And I think about that often. So yeah, I don't know. I think when I think about the future, I want a more flexible, lively space.
And you know what? To piggyback off that flexibility, I think it goes back to time. I think when you still think of time in a linear frame, that is so inflexible. You're not allowing for any kind of movement because you're just like boom, 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 boom. And then I think because art historians are trained in that way, and then they're the curators, and then curators always become museum directors. So there's never room for flexibility in our time structures or like what that could look like. And probably because you can't monetize inflexibility. Like you can't monetize just a come and go vibe. And yeah, I think that's another part, but communities are rich with so much that it doesn't have to come back to money. It can, you know, a wealth of knowledge is living in our communities right now. And we're just not there to like, to be a part of it. You know, I mean, obviously some people are, but you know, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you keep moving around trying to chase a job, you may not be.
That pays you $2, you know, gosh.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, one thing that a couple of comments that resonated with me earlier in the talk was that art workers tend to fall in love with the potential of the museum, and almost rarely do they fall in love with the execution. Yeah, I find myself in that position a bit these days.
And so many talented folks are going to leave, and they are leaving, right? Like we don't have time to just sit around and wait for these folks to kind of like get it, you know. We're going to leave and we'll create our own spaces and we'll be better. And I really don't think museums are going to last in this form if they don't get it together, because we're in such a special moment in time where DIA is like a thing for corporations, for like so many places. And I think that get in where you fit in, but like you're losing out, like you're gonna lose. And that's kind of my righteousness in my everyday life. I think like at the end of the day, I feel like I know that I am on the right path. I'm doing the right thing, even if that's going against my museum, you know, like, and I think I don't know if that ideologies with other folks, you know, they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
holding your institution accountable.
Yeah. And I think
that's a big part.
And it's a generational thing. I really do think that. I think this boomer generation, they're just so used to saying, well, what can I do about it? Or like, it is what it is. Like, I'm just my little self. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but every revolution started with one person, right? And then the ideas build, and it's building right now. So where are you going to be? You're going to be over there defending an institution that pays you $3? Sorry. Not me.
No, it's just very true. Because I think even as sometimes I talk to people in my family, right? And yeah, y'all can weigh in definitely. My family doesn't really understand the museum world, right? They didn't feel welcome in the museum world. And so now that I'm in it, it's even more confusing because like, well, Kendra, you got in, right? You've been fighting your entire life to get in. Why would you want to buck against the museum world, the art world, right? You should be grateful that you have a seat at the table. I'm like, first of all, it's a kiddie seat. But yeah, I have the right to speak when I want to speak. I have a right to break away from the table when I want to break away from the table. I have a right to burn the table down. But yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying about this mentality of just sometimes gratefulness for even being in the door. And I resent that greatly.
Yeah.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. And like I said earlier, this is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. So look out for that and share it with your friends in the future. Just to wrap some things up, I wanted to thank y'all so much, Johanna and Kendall, for participating in this coffee chat. It was such a fantastic conversation. Just a little programming notes. This is our last coffee chat for the summer. And we'll start again in the winter, or yeah, in the I'm not sure when we'll start it again, actually. Well, probably
not linear.
fall. Yeah, maybe late fall, I guess. But we do have a fantastic show here at the gallery at Big Medium. It is Jeronimo Reyes Retana, and it's his fantastic show called Epcot, and it will be up until June 26th. The gallery is by appointment only, so be sure to go to our Big Medium website to schedule an appointment. And I wanted to thank y'all once again so very much. This is a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yay, bye.
All right. Thanks everybody for attending. See y'all at the next one. Bye-bye.